and how they become members.
There's no initiation, there's no you go out and commit a crime or you go out and do something that's going to put your life at risk. That's not how we work. To become a killer bee, all you got to do is hang with us.
They called him the Don of South Auckland, not just a gang boss, but a kingmaker in a kingdom of chaos. Josh Masters wasn't your average street thug. He moved like a man who knew he'd already won, commanding respect in every room, every block, every patch. But power like that doesn't come clean, and it never comes free. This is a story soaked in loyalty and betrayal, wrapped in yellow bandanas and stitched together with the roar of Harley-Davidsons. It's the rise and brutal fall of a man who built an empire from the cracked concrete of Otara and watched it crumble from a wheelchair. We're diving deep into the world of the Killer Bees, one of New Zealand's most notorious street gangs, and the man who took them from wannabe outfit to feared syndicate. From hip-hop label to meth empire, from mentorship to violence, Masters straddled the line between community leader and ruthless operator. Until one day, a handshake from a former mate turned into a bullet to the spine. This isn't just a Gangland story. It's a warning shot, a hard look at how fast the crown can slip and how sharp the sting is when it does. Josh Masters was born in the thick of South Auckland's concrete sprawl, Otara, a suburb known for its rich Polynesian culture, booming Sunday markets, and the shadow that crept in after dark. Poverty, overcrowded state housing, and broken systems turned Otara into a pressure cooker. If you didn't have a plan, the street made one for you. For young Josh, the streets offered both identity and purpose. He wasn't just drifting, he was watching, learning, absorbing. Older boys in patched denim jackets ran things. The Tribesmen Motorcycle Club were legends around here. Maori, hard as nails, and rolling deep on bikes that shook the ground. They weren't just a gang, they were an institution. And to a kid like Masters, they looked like gods. He got in early, earned trust, proved himself useful, fought when he had to, talked his way out when he didn't, sharp, quick with the tongue, and even quicker with fists. It didn't take long before Masters was wearing the patch, not just a member of the Tribesmen, but one of the younger ones moving up fast. But he wasn't content being a cog in someone else's machine. Masters saw something bigger, a generational shift. The old-school Bicky ways didn't connect with the new wave of young Maori and Pacifica coming up. They needed a new banner, a new sound, a new crew. So in the early 2000s, Masters founded the Killer Bees, still loyal to the Tribesmen, sure. But this was a gang with a younger heartbeat, loud, flashy, yellow. If the Tribesmen were leather and grit, the Bees were sneakers and swagger. Otara's younger generation swarmed to it. The Bees gave them music, identity, a brotherhood. Their colors, black and yellow, weren't just gang tags. They were stitched into streetwear, painted on bikes, inked into skin. They rolled deep, proud, and unmissable. Masters wasn't just building a gang, he was building a brand. And from day one, he made sure everyone knew who the face of that brand was. But the Bees weren't just another street crew tagging walls and posting rap clips. Underneath the noise and style, a machine was forming, one that would soon catch the attention of every cop, journalist, and rival gang in the country. Josh Masters had put Otara on the map, but it came at a price. Respect in this world isn't given, it's taken, and it has to be defended. When the Killer Bees burst onto the scene, it wasn't subtle. South Auckland hadn't seen anything like it. Yellow bandanas, motorbikes swarming intersections, rap videos dropping online that racked up thousands of views overnight, and at the center of it all, Josh Masters, running the show like a streetwise CEO. Masters knew image mattered. Where older gangs kept things in the shadows, he wanted the Bees loud and proud. So he built Colorway Records, a music label that doubled as a megaphone for the Killer Bees lifestyle. Their tracks weren't polished pop. They were raw, aggressive, dripping with gang life and Southside slang. Lyrics about loyalty, retaliation, fast cash, and life on the edge. But this wasn't just music for the sake of music. This was marketing, weaponized. Young kids who saw no future in school or a 9-to-5 job saw the bees and thought, that's it. That's the life. Flash clothes, faster bikes, and a sense of power most of them had never tasted. Recruitment numbers surged. Meanwhile, beneath the beats and bravado, a different kind of business was booming. Police would later describe the Killer Bees as one of the most sophisticated and fast-growing methamphetamine networks in the country. And Josh Masters was the architect. Meth, or P, as it's known on the streets, was flooding Auckland. And the Bees were at the center of its movement, sourcing it, cutting it, selling it, protecting it. Colorway Records, investigators believed, was a front. Album launches became money laundering operations. Music videos paid in dirty cash. Street cred was leveraged into real criminal capital. Masters ran things with military structure. Crews had ranks. Orders were tight. Everyone knew their role. If someone stepped out of line, consequences followed, swift and brutal. But to those under him, he wasn't just a boss. He was a leader, a protector, sometimes even a father figure, and loyalty to Josh ran deep. But success like that doesn't go unnoticed. The cars got flashier, the parties got louder, and the violence started to creep in. Stabbings, drive-bys, shootings. Rivals were circling, cops were closing in. In 2007, the walls started shaking. After months of surveillance, phone taps, and undercover work, police launched Operation Leo, a full-scale crackdown on the Bees' meth operation. In one of the largest gang busts in New Zealand history, over 40 gang members were arrested. Cash, guns, meth, vehicles, all seized. And right at the top of the list, Josh Masters. He was charged with drug supply and money laundering. Colorway Records was dragged into the spotlight. No longer a music label, now Exhibit A. Masters pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was damning. Recorded calls, text messages, testimony from insiders. By 2008, the verdict was in. Masters was sentenced to over a decade in prison. It should have been the end of his empire. But for a man like Josh Masters, the view doesn't change, even from behind bars. The morning of the takedown started like any other. Streets still quiet, mist hanging low over South Auckland. Then came the sirens, the door rams, the shouting. Cops swarmed in from every angle, 300 officers across 40 properties. The Killer Bees woke up to Operation Leo, and Josh Masters woke up to the beginning of the end. The scale was massive. Police had spent over a year watching, listening, piecing together the puzzle. What they found was a criminal network that reached far beyond what anyone thought a youth gang could pull off. Meth labs, drug runners, bank accounts stuffed with dirty money. And right at the top, making calls and giving orders, Masters. They had the phones tapped. They had coded language cracked. They had his crew cold. Over 1,400 charges were laid against 60 individuals. Masters alone faced 34 counts, including supplying methamphetamine and laundering hundreds of thousands of dollars. Police claimed Colorway Records was just a smokescreen, a place to funnel profits, mask transactions, and keep the gang's profile high while their true business operated in the shadows. In court, Masters kept up the act, suited, composed, speaking about second chances and community uplift. His defense tried to paint him as a misguided mentor, someone trying to give local boys purpose through music, but the prosecution tore that down brick by brick. They had wiretaps of him orchestrating drug deals. They had surveillance of him meeting with suppliers. They had associates flipping, pointing fingers, filling in the blanks. The jury didn't need much convincing. Josh Masters was convicted and handed a 10.5-year sentence. For the first time since the Bees were born, Their founder was off the streets and locked down. But what should have been a death blow didn't quite land. Masters wasn't just some foot soldier who went away quietly. He was a strategist, a true believer in hierarchy and control. And prison? Prison was just another battleground. From inside the wire, he stayed in touch with lieutenants. Orders still flowed, messages still moved. Some guards later described his influence as intimidating, saying he operated like a shot caller even in chains. The gang kept growing, kept hustling, even without their king on the street. And that power, that loyalty, it scared people, both on the outside and within. Over the next few years, while Masters plotted legal appeals and parole applications, the Bees weathered the heat. Other gangs watched closely. Rivals tested boundaries. The tribesmen, their old allies, started to drift. The center was holding, but only just. Masters, meanwhile, bided his time. He wrote letters, met with lawyers, kept his image alive through music and coded communication. Every parole hearing was another chance to test the system, to inch closer to the gate. By 2018, he'd served most of his time. And somehow, despite the drugs, despite the damage, despite the warnings from police, Josh Masters was granted parole. He walked out of prison the same way he walked in, head high, surrounded by bees, already planning his next move. But the streets had changed, and so had the people waiting on the other side. Josh Masters wasn't the kind of inmate who disappeared behind concrete and steel. He walked into prison already a legend, and he made sure that legend grew. For some, doing time is about survival. For Masters, it was strategy. Even locked up, he played the long game. He landed in Auckland's high-security wing and quickly carved out influence. Word spread that he was still pulling strings. Correction staff flagged him as a security risk. Inmates either respected him or feared him. Most, it seemed, did both. He ran his corner of the yard like a branch of the street. Code of silence, clear ranks, and consequences if you broke either. While officially disconnected from gang business, Masters remained in close contact with key figures on the outside. Visits from associates. Letters that carefully skirted surveillance rules. Quiet messages passed through lawyers or family. The Bees didn't just survive during his sentence, they expanded. Recruitment continued. The music still dropped. The yellow still flew. But the walls were closing in. The tribesmen MC, their original allies and mentors, were changing course. Some say they resented how big the Killer Bees had become. Too fast, too flashy, too independent. Others whispered that Masters had ambitions that extended beyond the Bees. Maybe even a takeover. By the time he started applying for parole, the alliance was already strained. Meetings between senior members got tense. Patches that once stood side by side started to turn away. There was talk, quiet, but persistent, that some tribesmen felt betrayed, that Masters had forgotten where he came from. Inside, Masters played the part. When the parole board came calling, he spoke about remorse, about rehabilitation, about wanting a clean start, said he was done with gang life, promised he'd live quietly, under strict supervision, with a GPS ankle bracelet if they liked. Corrections didn't buy it. His first applications were denied. Risk too high, they said. Influence too strong. The police agreed. Behind closed doors, they warned the board, this guy's not out. He's just operating differently. But time wore on. Masters kept pushing. Behavior inside prison was borderline, firm, sometimes aggressive, but no major incidents. Eventually, after a decade behind bars, they caved. With heavy conditions, Josh Masters was released on parole in 2018. He walked free with a watchful eye over his shoulder and a list of rules stapled to his future. No contact with gang members, no drugs, GPS monitoring, and a curfew. Still, it didn't take long for word to spread. The boss was back. He tried to keep a low profile at first, but everyone knew. Masters was seen at events, spotted with known associates. Police tailed him constantly, but he kept things just clean enough to avoid breaches. The bees rallied. The yellow returned in force. But something had shifted. The tribesmen were no longer on side. Internal politics brewed. Respect turned into rivalry. And inside that quiet tension, something darker began to stir. The man who walked out of prison expected loyalty. What he got instead was a bullet. April 26, 2019. A quiet Friday morning in Mount Wellington. Josh Masters rolled into the Harley-Davidson dealership. Routine stop, just sorting out his bike. No heat, no security, no tension. Not that day. But Gangland betrayals don't send invitations. Also inside the shop, Okusitino Tai, a high-ranking member of the Tribesmen Motorcycle Club. Once, Tai had stood shoulder to shoulder with Masters, trusted him, respected him. But now, their history was poisoned by whispers, fractured loyalties, and a power struggle too far gone to patch over. Masters walked through the door. He didn't know this was it. Tay did. Security footage would later show it all. Cold, calculated. Tay stepped forward, pulled a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, and fired. The bullet hit Masters square in the back, punching through his spine. He collapsed instantly, legs limp, unable to move. Tay raised the gun again. A second shot, aimed at the head. It jammed. He tried again. Jammed again. Fate stepped in with a shaky hand. By the time Tay fled, Masters was lying motionless on the dealership floor, bleeding and paralyzed. Bystanders scrambled. Someone called emergency services. Cops and paramedics arrived fast. For a moment, it wasn't about patches or turf. It was about survival. The damage was permanent. The bullet had lodged in his spinal cord. Josh Masters would never walk again. News broke within hours. The shooting sent a shockwave through New Zealand's underworld. A gang boss taken down, not by a rival outfit, but by one of his own. The killer bees and the tribesmen had finally shattered the uneasy peace they'd kept for years. Tay later handed himself in to police. He was charged with wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, reduced from attempted murder, reportedly due to the failed second shot, and questions around intent. During sentencing, Tay's lawyer painted a picture of paranoia and betrayal. Said Tay believed Masters had placed a hit on him. Said this was self-preservation, not cold revenge. The court handed Tay 7 years. But inside the bees, justice wasn't found in the courtroom. Masters had ruled like a king, and kings don't get shot in public without repercussions. Retaliation talk spread quickly. Police began tracking movements, monitoring both gangs closely. Old bonds were officially dead. As for Masters, the road ahead was brutal. He now required full-time care, couldn't move from the waist down. The man who once commanded motorbike processions through South Auckland was now confined to a wheelchair, his empire forever altered. Still, he survived. And surviving meant something in his world. He made appearances, showed up at gang events in a wheelchair or on a quad bike, sat tall, stone-faced, surrounded by lieutenants. The message was clear. I'm still here. But power in the gang world is like oxygen. If you can't stand, if you can't strike back, others start breathing it in. And the bees, once so unified, were beginning to split in different directions. Josh Masters had taken a bullet from within his own kingdom. Now he'd have to rule what was left of it from a throne with wheels. Josh Masters should have faded after the shooting. Most gang leaders do. Taken out by prison, paranoia, or a well-placed round. But not him. He wasn't just still alive, he was still visible. In 2022, footage surfaced of him attending the Killer Bees' annual AGM in Ramarama, flanked by patched members, cruising on a quad bike, silent but unmistakably present. The message was clear. "I'm not done." But the gangland had changed, and it was bloodier. The alliance with the tribesman MC was dead, replaced by open warfare. The shooting had detonated a long simmering feud. What started with bad blood turned into drive-bys, home invasions, and tit-for-tat arsons. Police were left playing whack-a-mole across South Auckland and beyond. The tribesmen, older and deeply entrenched, still had muscle. But the killer bees had grown fast. Hundreds of members, their own identity, and an empire built on meth and fear. Without the glue of that old alliance, both groups spiraled into retaliation. At one point in 2023, there were over a dozen gang-related shootings in a single fortnight across Auckland and the far north. Cops called it a gang war. Locals just called it chaos. Inside the bees, there were fractures too. Masters was still respected, sure, but power respects power. And the boss couldn't walk anymore, couldn't retaliate, couldn't ride. He could show up, speak, glare, but in the world he helped build, that's not always enough. Some younger members started doing things their own way. New crews with new leaders, hot-headed and unpredictable, the kind of guys Masters would have disciplined in his prime. But now, he watched from a chair as they carved up parts of the empire, splintering the bees into factions that were loyal more to profit than to him. For law enforcement, it was a nightmare. Police ran intelligence operations, community outreach, public threats. They raided known bees' houses, seized guns, slammed offenders with strike offenses. But they couldn't erase the reach that Masters had put in motion. And through it all, the man himself stayed quiet. No interviews, no public statements, just the occasional sighting. Always surrounded, never alone. A ghost in his own legend. What's left now? On one side, Masters is remembered by some in Otara as a mentor, someone who gave structure to the chaos, who offered brotherhood to boys raised in a world that gave them none. A man who made music, made money, made meaning. On the other side, he's the architect of an empire that dealt in meth, violence, and fear. A kingpin who built his name on broken lives, who brought war to his own doorstep and got gunned down by a man who once called him brother. Josh Masters lives, but the world he built may already be slipping from his grip. In Gangland, survival isn't always victory. Sometimes it's just the longest punishment.